Hello there, everyone, and welcome once again to our wonderful pod where pop culture meets PR. On this episode, listeners, we are talking about Erika Kirk. Erika Kirk, CEO of Turning Point USA, widow of former CEO of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk. There have been more developments when it comes to Erika Kirk. Several developments, but we're going to lead off with one that took place as recently as last week at time of recording. It was from American comedian Drewski, who released a short sketch entitled How Conservative Women in America Act. Now, the title alone, provocative to an extent, but context is everything. In this sketch, Drewski portrayed a character which he claims is indicative of all conservative women in America, but bore a striking resemblance to a caricatured version of one Erika Kirk. I will leave it there and hand over to you, Jackie, because there's a lot more than meets the eye here, isn't there? What have been your recent takeaways from all the developments surrounding Erika Kirk?
I'd never heard of Drewski before, but I'm assured by people much younger than me that he's quite a well-known media personality. And producer Felix filled us in on his sort of dating show that he does on YouTube or something. But
Could have been love, yeah. Could have been love, I hear, is the name of this dating show, which, yes, you're right, Jackie. Our producer Felix is, and I'm sort of, for our listeners, you might not see me wincing here, but our producer Felix is an avid watcher of, I hear, from what he's told us. But yes, you're right.
I think he says he tortures his girlfriend with it. He is an influencer and a comedian. And he has just come to the public's knowledge and burst onto the scene really into the general Twitterverse when he posted a skit of his on X, which you've just described. And this was part of a series of skits that he'd started doing that were very pro to him. So what he does is they're calling it the white face with prosthetics. So he sort of builds himself up with these different prosthetics on his face and does these skits according to a theme or a tenet that's being debated in America. And obviously, the Erika Kirk story is being widely debated at the moment because of a number of things that are going on in her life since the assassination of her husband. But I'll come back to that in a minute. But this Drewski skit has been completely outstanding. He posted it on X on Wednesday the 18th. By Thursday the 19th, it had 22 million viewers. By the Saturday just gone, he'd had 163 million viewers. I haven't looked since then. Those are statistics that were reported on Yahoo. It actually never mentioned Erika Kirk, but it showed himself as being Erika because he kind of like juxtaposed his presentation. He's a rather larger man with a larger face, but he was made up with blonde hair and in a white suit and in front of fireworks and sparklers and everything, just taking off her appearance at Amfest, where she sort of came on with all that Elvis Presley razzmatazz onto stage. And he's really sort of tapped into something here with this skit. And that led the skit itself to be shown on all sorts of cable channels and all sorts of other influencer platforms. But here's the interesting thing. And it's from a PR perspective, looking through the lens of social media and how that actually influences so much more than we ever would have thought it would before, and why it's so important in a PR person's armory to really understand the impact of social media and what to do in the case of a crisis, because this is a crisis for Erika Kirk, but also how to analyze it as a commentator, because we're seeing all sorts of different things coming out on social media, YouTube, Twitter, X, Insta, and all of those platforms. But it's not very widely reported in your traditional broadsheet or tabloid media. And these are the stories that bubble under, get a lot of public opinion behind them. But they sort of seem to be sat on by the legacy media, let's call them. And I think that's quite significant because we try not to go too near politics on this show because we are not political commentators. But the media is a really important part of politics. It's where politicians make a lot of their claims. It's where they put their manifestos. It's where they try to sway the court of public opinion. And this particular subject, Erika Kirk, has moved from that of an assassinated man's widow to being a very sort of political story because she is now the CEO of Turning Point USA, which is a conservative youth movement or a company, an organization that came into being because of Charlie Kirk, her husband. May he rest in peace, because of his vision of how he wanted the conservative youth to be. And that organization now employs hundreds of people. It's raised over 250 million in donations and revenues and sponsorships. It's a really significant, powerful force in North America today. This is a movement which is looking to influence the minds and the beliefs of conservative young America. So it is a movement which is really significant. And therefore, the way that the leader of that movement is portrayed and how she handles the media and how she handles the portrayals of her, whether they be good, bad, indifferent, or ugly, how she handles that or how her team handles that is really important. And it merits a little bit of analysis on our part.
I completely agree. When I was listening to you there, a question just sort of cropped up in my mind there. Is there a fundamental problem? And I feel like I maybe have asked this on previous episodes of the podcast, but in a slightly different way. Is a fundamental problem here? You say how she is portrayed in the media, and then you said, and how she responds to portrayals in the media. And from the outside looking in, I tend to think that if there's consistency across both those mantras, if you have a consistent message, if you follow the holy trinity of the mission, vision, values, so you have an understanding when it comes to your mission and vision and values of how you're portrayed in the media, but you also are consistent when it comes to your responses to that, then you're kind of on the right track, you're in the right direction. There's a fundamental problem here that there is such a difference in her own mind and from her own team in how she wants to be portrayed and how she is portrayed in the media and how she, and by extension Turning Point USA, then respond to portrayals in the media. Because on the one hand, at times she seems to want to try and control the narrative and control how she's portrayed. But then when she's portrayed in a certain way, their responses are very front-footed, they're quite incendiary. And we've seen that with this Drewski situation, with this Drewski skit. And I'm sure you can bring in another example that we mentioned we might bring in as well, in terms of how explosive these responses have at times been from other things she's had to defend herself against in the media, not the legacy media, but in this new type of media, isn't it? There's a fundamental dichotomy that she's still not managed to wrestle control back of.
Absolutely. Well, the other stuff that's been and I think this is where Drewski has kind of jumped on the trends that are happening in North America. The other stuff that's been bubbling under has been this series that Candace Owens has been running called Bride of Charlie, which is a really deep dive into Erika Kirk from literally birth right the way through to where she is right now. And this was a series of 6, I think, podcasts that Candace Owens, who's a really popular right-wing podcaster. She used to be the communications director of Turning Point USA. She was very close to Charlie Kirk, knew Charlie Kirk way before Erika Kirk came on the scene and married Charlie Kirk. She always refers to Charlie like he was her little brother. They traveled all the world together. And she has been on a mission to find out why Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And because of the way that Erika Kirk has risen to power so quickly, taking over the mantle of her husband's creation, Turning Point USA, Candace Owens has increasingly been rattled by what's been going on there. And then it's just sort of turned into outright war between the two organizations, leading Candace to double down. I mean, if this woman has form, if you go up against her and you haven't got anything that is factual that you can credibly put in front of her to answer her questions, she'll just keep digging like a terrier. She doesn't back down, and the more you fight against her, the more entrenched she gets. And it really surprised me how Turning Point USA behaved with Candace Owens after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, because if it was me and I was the communications director there, I would have pulled everybody that I was closely aligned with, or that Charlie was closely aligned with. I'd have pulled them in tightly to help support the organization through a really tricky time. Everything that Turning Point USA has done has been completely swapped around from what you would normally expect an organization of that size to do in a situation when their leader has been gunned down so violently and so publicly. They've done the antithesis of any normal advised position. They literally just turned the apple cart upside down. And this is where they've attracted so much negative attention, so much criticism, and so many questions around their very existence right now and how they're being run and what are their objectives, because they seem to be very different from the organization that Charlie Kirk was running. So there's all these inconsistencies going on right now. And nipping back to Drewski very quickly, the Drewski skit has shone another light back onto all of that, but it's also been picked up by people like Joe Rogan, who has one of the world's leading podcasts, and he's talking about Erika Kirk and calling her an odd duck. Even I think it was Candace said that she went into Grok and asked Grok to ID the person that was being featured on the Drewski skit, and Grok said that's Erika Kirk on that skit, even though it wasn't stated on the skit. And indeed, Candace has shown the skit herself, and it will continue to barrel forward like that. And what you said quite rightly, Lyle, about values and mission and vision seem to be completely out of the window. Doesn't seem to be the touchstone of those fundamental core principles of communications for Turning Point USA to hold on to. So when they do, as you say, these kind of very front-footed responses, this is because they are being very reactionary. And when you're reactionary, and we often say that this on our podcast, being reactionary, being knee-jerk, being emotional, very, very rarely, sometimes it works, but in the minority by an absolutely massive margin, very rarely does that kind of reaction get you the results you want to get. And indeed, the backlash, not only from Turning Point USA, but from people like the Senator Ted Cruz, who said it was beyond contempt. All of this sort of conservative MAGA backlash has fueled the fire. It's really been, as I'd use another one of your lovely words, incendiary. It's absolutely lit up the pyres and got everybody talking. And that isn't what you want to do if you want to bury a story. It's a bit like, I often say, being in communications is like a love story. If you give anybody your passion and your energy, you're giving them the attention they desire. If you just walk away and ignore and don't rise above, oftentimes the next thing will come into the media landscape. And yes, you might be left a bit bruised and strategizing, but you won't be burnt by your own reaction.
Hold it right there, listeners. We just wanted to take this opportunity to say that we absolutely love recording this content for you. So please do like, subscribe, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And please do head to our Substack as well. Search Where Pop Culture Meets PR and get those comments in. We absolutely love reading them on that platform and wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of this episode. And I feel like actually I can almost speak to this as quite an emotional, quite reactionary individual myself, as you well know, Jackie, at times. And we'll leave that there. But pun very much intended here. I'm going to rewind quite a way back, if you'll allow me. Was there a turning point for Erika Kirk, and by extension, Turning Point USA, that they sort of missed? And what I mean by that is, we've spoken a bit, we don't want to get bogged down in the political specifics of this, the right versus the left, but it became political in a way it didn't need to. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Bride of Charlie, this Candace Owens series, investigative, a deep dive, and we'll get onto the specifics of that potentially, but a political move, potentially, sort of a political, strategic, tactical move. The media, you said that the media are so entrenched in the political system, the media are a crucial part of the political landscape in the US, here in the UK, all over the world. But in the case of someone tragically losing their life, whatever their political affiliation, there's a sweet spot, I feel, and maybe I'm being idealistic here, where it doesn't need to be political. If you behave a certain way and react a certain way as one of the central characters to that tragedy, you can subvert that political style of reporting, and that side of reporting can kind of go a different way. But because of the decisions she made, because of the decisions Turning Point USA made and continue to make, it's a stick that she's now being beaten with, and it's following her around, isn't it? The Candace Owens series, the Drewski skit. The Drewski skit is designed to be a comic skit, a comic sketch, but the title is How Conservative Women in America Act. The very title of the skit is political in and of itself. Do you think it's political because they made it political from the get-go? Do you think that's a problem they have been followed around by ever since they made those early decisions?
What, Turning Point USA?
Yeah, and Erika Kirk by extension, I guess.
Yes. This has been the interesting thing. I mean, there's so much to talk about with Erika Kirk, so many things that they've done wrong, but one of the things that I think even the biggest advocate of Erika Kirk would agree with is that the direction that Turning Point USA is being taken is not 100% in line with the way that Charlie Kirk was taking the organization. So I think this is the first thing that most people could agree with in terms of what they're doing wrong. So, for example, just the whole kind of the very being of Erika Kirk as the figurehead after Charlie Kirk saying that the wife should be at home looking after the children, the man should be out there earning a crust and providing for the children. Whether you agree with that or not, those were the founding principles that he stood on a hill with, and she agreed with. There are many podcasts that she did with him where they're talking about the way they have their marriage and who does what and why she's so pleased that she doesn't have to think for herself. Sorry. But, she was very much portrayed as, the little woman at home, the woman that, she should be glad to be having the time to raise the children. But now she's the CEO of this 650 person company, quarters of billions of dollars. And where are the children? Both under 3. That's very odd. And she's traveling all around the country, doing all sorts of different events. She's not at home with the kids doing what Charlie Kirk would have said that he would have wanted his wife to do. And they made a big thing about the fact that Charlie Kirk said, if anything happened to me, Erika could run this. But it's not really based in any kind of evidentiary fact. It's very hard for that to be proved. And that does rankle that. And the other thing that, he had been talking about very recently was the fact that he didn't want to be taking big donations from Israeli companies or supporters, and he was fighting some claims that he was anti-Semitic, and he really wasn't. He was a great supporter of Israel and of Jewish people, but he did not like what was happening in Gaza, and he felt that he had to sort of step back and separate himself a bit from some of the lobbying that was going on, and particularly by a man called Ben Shapiro, who's another big Israeli supporting podcaster from the right, who has had various kind of dalliances with Turning Point, with Charlie Kirk. In fact, Candace Owens used to work with Ben Shapiro at the Daily Wire, but Charlie had recently sort of separated away from him. And yet when Amfest opens up, who comes on stage but Ben Shapiro? Now, these are all facts. This is all stuff that has actually happened, which I can say we've seen this being enacted on stages. We know we've seen what Charlie Kirk had written, had talked about, had stated. So anything I'm saying right now is nothing to do with my opinion. It's just fact and the way facts are playing out. And that is inconsistency. And that inconsistency of mission, of vision, of values unsettles people. And so how can you base any serious or credible comms around your position as the new leader of an organization when you take it in a different direction? You're not espousing the previous values. It all looks very questionable. Now you layer that on with coming out in an Elvis Presley styly razzmatazz USA in the hole, stars and spangled banners and stripes and all this sort of thing. That was show business. And that rankled as well, because that is not your typical understanding of what a grieving woman does. I mean, most people in Erika Kirk's position wouldn't be able to get out of bed, struggle to even feed their children, let alone get on a stage and hug J.D. Vance. And that was another thing. The whole American Politico lobby all coming behind her, President Trump appointing her to some military committee, having her come to his opening address and all these different things. And obviously J.D. Vance and Usha Vance coming and picking her up and bringing Charlie's coffin back to Arizona. This huge political movement behind Erika Kirk, lifting her up even to a sort of higher position than Charlie Kirk. It's all very odd, leading Joe Rogan to say she's an odd duck. And Candace would probably want to describe her as something else that rhymes with odd duck. But because her hatred is now literally seething, because what Candace Owens is doing is she is forensically investigating all the events running up to the assassination and everything that's happened thereafter.
And this is where I'd like to head to next, if I may, because I know you've been looking into this. And actually, the way I'm going to frame this question is, you mentioned there, the inconsistency is what unsettles people. That lack of consistency unsettles a variety of different audiences, the variety of different audiences through which you play your actions out in front of. We've spoken, albeit in a slightly different framework, about the fact that actually from a comms perspective, consistency is one of the greatest tools in your armory to battle against that lack of ease from the court of public opinion. This does segue quite nicely into some context you're going to provide from what Candace Owens has been up to with this series, because is the lack of consistency when it comes to Erika Kirk and by extension Turning Point, is the problem not only that it has created this unsettled atmosphere, but who it's unsettled and how that lack of ease has then manifested itself? Because if you're inconsistent, depending on just how inconsistent you are and the type of person you are and the type of profile you are, you open yourself up to some very, very damaging pieces of media, some very, very damaging attacks on your credibility, such as the Candace Owens series that you're about to provide some more context on. But do you sort of understand the question, which is that had they been more consistent, that you can kind of plug the gaps, can't you? You don't open yourself up as much to an investigative series like this, to people doing a lot of things, to people doing a lot of nitpicking, because you've kind of plugged the holes, haven't you?
Well, in a way, it was inconsistency and lack of any thoughtful strategy around how people or the general public or anybody, including Candace, would perceive them, because they went very fully on their own plan. I mean, it was very clear that they planned out what they were going to do in a reactionary way. You can't put on events like they put on with Charlie Kirk's memorial and Fest, the book tour. These sort of things cannot happen without serious planning. Those things can't happen without serious strategy. But their strategy, I would position it as not considering communications throughout that strategy. I think they thought about it very much from a fundraising, from an existential perspective. They thought about what they wanted to do and how they wanted the world to see it, but they didn't think about how it would be taken, and they didn't think through how to communicate what they thought about. And this is a big mistake that organizations make very frequently. This is not just Turning Point USA. They make the mistake that we are back in the 2000s when it comes to your communication, when it comes to broadcasting what your narrative is. Communications of today should always be on the premise and on the basis of there will be a dialogue, that you will cast something out and that somebody will cast something back at you. Because wherever you place your message, there are comments, and oftentimes, and this is the funniest thing, we've talked about this on our podcast before, we are now serving communications to nations, to the world of headline readers or comment readers. Honestly, I promise you, Lyle, I would go as far as to say 50% of articles that are written by people like you and me are not read, but the headline is read and the comments might be read, but the body of that article won't be read. And that's our broadcast. That's the narrative that we want to push out there. So your Turning Point USA, what they did was they said, right, we're doing this and this is what we're going to broadcast, and not even considering how it looks, how it will be perceived, what people might say, and how they would respond. And you cannot run a comms team on the basis of broadcast.
We would just like to tell you about a brand new podcast from the creative minds behind where pop culture meets PR. By fans and for fans, Pod Round discovers and curates the best episodes from across YouTube, Spotify, Substack, and the whole pod world, and delivers the ones worth your time straight to you. Serving up different genres and different voices from different corners of the globe, Pod Round is the one-stop shop for podcast lovers. The first set of podcasts we're bringing you will all be about the royal family. So tune in. That's Pod Round, available wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of this episode. I couldn't agree more. And actually, you just raised a really interesting point there, which is that I've lost count the number of times where I've been in the comments of something I've watched or I've read. And one of the top comments has been, can't be bothered to read this and can't be bothered to watch all this. Can someone please explain in the comments in a couple of sentences what it's about? Now, therein lies, whispers of what stories are and where things might come from and the consistency of that storytelling. Because the reason an article exists in isolation about something, the reason a video exists in isolation about something is because you can't, in a few sentences, explain what a story is about. You can't, in a headline, justify what that story is about, but people try and find that. And that's where these inconsistencies come from.
And that's why we use tools like Mention, like Meltwater, to do some social listening. That's why we assess what people are saying. We look at what the feedback, what the sentiment is at the very least. We think about how things are going to be reacted to, what sort of dialogue we might get when we're considering the messages that we are going to go to the market with. And this is why it is much better to base yourself in truth than it ever is to try to act a part, because everybody will get caught in a lie at some stage. And this is something else where Candace is catching Erika out in time and time and time again. Now, I don't know whether there is anything more sinister in what Erika Kirk and Turning Point USA have done. And that is the way that Candace Owens is going and presenting her evidence, or intimating and surmising that there has to be something more sinister there. But whatever they are doing, they have clearly been trying to act a part. They haven't been consistently coming from a place of truth, because if you come consistently from a place of truth, you will never get found out, because there is nothing to find out. There is just the place of truth. Now, truth, it can be perceived in different ways. We're seeing this a lot with Harry and Meghan, especially now that there's this new book out from Tom Bauer. But fact is the place that we should base our personal truths on. So we should also bear in mind that whatever we say, we should come back to fact. And this is why I try to come to facts all the time when I help clients formulate their narratives, formulate their messages and their stories. They have to be couched in fact, in truth, in honesty, and yet their perception and their opinion of what that truth is. I mean, of course, everybody's opinion of things changes, doesn't it? You know, you might think a 0-0 draw for Man United versus Tottenham Hotspur is a disaster, whereas I would think, well, that's great for Man U. They're doing very well at the moment in the league. Sorry to bring in a football analogy, but that's your analysis of that fact. And that's the problem that this is serving up for Erika Kirk. Apart from the fact that she's not being a normal widow and she's evidently underqualified for the job of a CEO of a huge political organization like that, Miss Arizona. I suppose you did a few meet and greets, but apart from that, and working in a real estate agent, she just seems underqualified. And things like Candace has linked her to Epstein with the place that she worked in real estate in New York. There's been question marks over Romanian orphanages and sex trafficking, and her background really illustrating that she's been after fame, and then this sort of rise to power. It all looks very shonky, I think is a good word for it. So this oddness is captivating us. But I just want to make one more point before you bring it to a close, because I'm looking at the time ticking away, and I know that people can get a bit tired of us on their dog walk. So just sort of moving forward, if I had been in Turning Point USA, I would have done a lot of what I've just said is good practice. But also, there is something to consider about what it all means moving forwards. Because one of the things that was exposed in one of the Candace podcasts was that the Trump, the Vance Kirk ticket, Vance Kirk 2020 something.com was registered, I think, the day after Charlie Kirk died by an Arizona company. Arizona's where she lives. I don't know. Anyway, that's very conspiracy theorist. But all of this posturing has led to some proper political fallout, because the net result of this is that Candace Owens and other very prominent conservative commentators don't, or have question marks over whether the Tyler Robinson actually was the person that killed Charlie Kirk, even down to the extent that one of Trump's establishment servants, Joe Kent, who used to be, and Felix will tell us in the comments and Lyle can drop this into us, but he worked for President Trump in counterterrorism. He resigned recently because he was not allowed to investigate what was going on. He'd heard that there were some foreign actors involved in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, originating from different countries. And I think those countries were France and Israel, from reportage. And he was trying to investigate it, and he got shut down by Kash Patel and the FBI. And he resigned because he, as a the person in charge of counterterrorism, should be allowed to investigate these allegations. And that led him to thinking that there was something a little bit more behind all of this. And so this is starting to bubble under and cause a split in the party. There are splits happening in the right, in the conservative part, in the conservative side of the parties, and MAGA and everybody else who would be naturally behind Erika Kirk and are naturally behind Erika Kirk, are now starting to see other Trump supporting individuals of note starting to think differently. So this question mark could be dangerous for Trump, or could it? Because right now, there's a lot going on for Mr. Trump, with a bit of a war going on and all sorts of stuff happening in the markets and in the oil industry and in cost of living crisis that's affecting the whole of the world because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed. So he is fully in the media spotlight. This is nice fodder, to be honest, to be out there taking away a bit of the conspiracy theorists' time and keeping their noses thoroughly in the oat snuffle truffle bag of Charlie Kirk and away from all of the conspiracies that could be surrounding the motivations and objectives of the conflict that's happening in the Middle East. So this is a good distraction right now. But let's say it does blow up. Let's say it's discovered that Turning Point USA did conspire to take out Charlie Kirk. Would that be bad for Donald Trump? Maybe not. Maybe this would be a great setup again to take the attention away from Donald Trump when he wants that attention to be taken. We've seen this distraction technique handled in many ways by the Trump administration. They have a communications team bar none. People criticize it, but I would say that they know the art of distraction intimately. The Epstein files is one great example thereof. So let's take another look at this, Lyle, in another episode, maybe in a latest episode, to see how all this pans out. Because either way, I think President Trump is benefiting from this little brouhaha that is Erika Kirk and Turning Point USA.
And as we do bring this one to a close, I mean, I've gone on record with my opinion in the past of Donald Trump. That's something we have said on the podcast several times, is that it's best not to assume that something could well be bad for Donald Trump, because Trump himself and the administration therein, like you rightly point out, Jackie, are very good at manipulating certain things and working certain things to their advantage. So it remains to be seen if this will indeed form part of a strategy moving forward. A bit of context before we do.
Who knows? It's purely speculation, but it's an interesting point to be observed.
Absolutely. Very much an interesting point to be observed and to continue to observe as more developments, I'm sure, come to light. Quick bit of context. Our brilliant producer Felix has been on the case before we do bring this one to a close. Kent was the director of the National Counter-Terrorism Center, and he resigned because he found there to be no imminent threat. As the director of the National Counter-Terrorism Center, NCTC, Kent stated that Iran posed no immediate threat to the United States. He argued that the administration's justification for military strikes, dubbed Operation Epic Fury, was based on faulty or manipulated intelligence, blamed pressure from Israel, its powerful American lobby. Administration sources claim that Kent had already been sidelined for months before his resignation, interestingly, around the time of Kirk's assassination, potentially. So let's just keep that one on the burner. Let's keep that one under observation.
And been on Tucker Carlson Network podcast talking about how he was shut down on this investigation. Yeah, so worth a little nosy.
For sure. And whilst Jackie and I will keep this particular area, this particular topic under observation, we know we can also rely on you, our brilliant listeners, to do the very same and keep the comments coming in to inform us still further. And with that in mind, do keep those comments coming in wherever you get your podcast, particularly on our Substack. Head to our Substack, where pop culture meets PR. We love reading the comments on that platform. They really, really do inspire us. They really, really do help us. And we're so grateful for that engagement on that platform and wherever you get your podcasts. So do keep those coming in. Thank you so much for joining us on this, the latest episode of our wonderful pod, where pop culture meets PR. From Jackie and from myself, take care of yourselves. It's bye for now.